You see the effects of sex trafficking almost every single day, but you don't actually see it. It's almost as if your brain is trained to block all of the images and any thoughts that might arise from them. So let's try something new today and really open our eyes to see the world around us. When I started college, I didn't know anything about human trafficking. There was this vague idea about sex trafficking in some lesser developed countries, but that was it. One day in one of my classes, we had a guest speaker who was an advocate for trafficking victims in the US. All I could think about was, what? Trafficking here in the US? We're one of the most powerful countries in the world, and we have trafficking? We ended the class by watching a video about a young girl who was first sexually assaulted by her father at the age of 7. When she started high school, she was approached by an older man who took her under his wing as her boyfriend. Once he had her, he started manipulating her, telling her no one besides him would want her. She wasn't good enough. So, one day, he needed money. Sent her out on the street, and after a while when this was going on, he kept all the money, he started becoming violent, and started withholding her food when she didn't meet her nightly quotas. One night, after drugging her, she awoke to find his name tattooed on her neck, just to show the entire world who she really belonged to. I wanted to tell you her story to show you that human trafficking is real, and it's something that affects millions of people every day. Before we begin talking about trafficking, let's define what it really is. The UN defines trafficking as the recruitment of people by means of threat, force, deception, or abduction. Trafficking is about exploitation, not transportation. So that means anyone who is exploited, coerced, or forced by another falls under trafficking, regardless of whether they cross a border. It's commonly believed that trafficking starts when a stranger abducts their victim, but that's not the case. The process is generally initiated by someone the victim knows, such as a parent, a sibling, or even a significant other, someone they have an emotional attachment to. This is the strongest form of deception, and it targets vulnerable and insecure young women. If victims don't meet their quota, they can face the physical consequences. They try to run away, try to talk to the police, or even speak out of line. They're faced with threats and physical violence, even involving threats towards the girl's family. These traffickers have complete mental and physical control of their victims. So when they beat them, the victims feel as if they deserve it. The combined shame and fear makes them feel like they have no other options than to stay. As I share this research, many people expect to hear that women get started because of drugs, alcohol, they're addicts. Some believe that the refugee and minority populations are at the greatest risk, but that's not the case. Although runaways and homeless youth are prime targets for trafficking, there is no single profile for trafficking victims. Many people expect the minority population. But when I say, actually, the largest growing demographic in the United States is made up of 11-year-old Caucasian girls, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that 11-year-old girls are being sexually exploited in our own country. They want to be reassured that their loved ones aren't at risk because they don't fit the profile of a sex worker. They want to be reassured that it's impossible for their families to become trafficked. But they can't know that. I can't know that. No one can know that. Sex trafficking is an extremely difficult topic to talk about, but it's something we really need to talk about. There are currently 20 to 30 million slaves in the world, which means there are more slaves in the world today than in all of America's pre- and post-colonial history combined. Yet even with all of these numbers and statistics, people don't want to hear that trafficking occurs in the US. It's easier to think of trafficking, exploitation, and slavery as a thing of the past, or something that only occurs in less developed countries. Our culture is so ingrained in this belief that if we don't see it happening, it doesn't happen. This is part of the problem. We're part of the problem. So before we continue, I'll ask again, really open your eyes to see the world around you. Now, my research focused on how the internet has increased human trafficking. I'm sure all of you know how easy it is to find pornography in chat rooms online. But what I'm sure most of you do not know is that within minutes, sex buyers can find trafficked girls and women based on their height, their race, their breast size, and any other physical characteristic you can imagine. They can even search for specific sexual services and find a list of trafficked girls and women in their area that provides those services. They can even find out how the women and girls behave during the encounter, because it is desirable for them to act as if they like it. It's even better if she pretends to orgasm. Everyone knows how Yelp works. You basically search for a business or a restaurant and rate it based on its performance. Sex buyers use that same idea for their websites, but instead of reviewing businesses and restaurants, they're reviewing trafficked girls and women. And when I tell you there are hundreds of these sites, you can just imagine the kind of detail they go in. Trafficking generates about $32 billion globally every year, and the US alone makes up a third of that. As long as there is such a heavy demand for sex with underage girls and women, we will not be able to defeat human trafficking. We have to look at the buyers who continually support and invest in this market, because they're the reason this still exists. This isn't a complicated theory, it's rather simple. When people stop buying sex, there's no profit. And where there's no profit, there's no business. But we don't look at the buyers. When we think of trafficking, we think of the victims and the traffickers. Now, can anyone remember a story in the news where law enforcement busted a trafficking ring? Okay, a few of you. Now, can anyone remember a story about the people buying the sex in the news? Okay, I don't see anyone. So you can see we have a little bit of a problem. We focus on the victims and traffickers, not the people on the receiving end committing the crime. Now, the majority of buyers really think that women love sex. They love men, and they really enjoy their job. They even make a lot of money. They think that they have the right idea. They even have the justifications to show that they don't feel what they're doing is wrong. Some want to engage in sexual activities their partner refuses. Some partners may be pregnant and abstaining from sex. Others believe that paying for sex does not qualify as having an affair. Now, sex workers in the US on the street make roughly $25 to $30 an hour. Now, sex workers online in Salt Lake City make an average of $250 an hour. The price for a child, on the other hand, is over $500. Now remember, the girls and women aren't making this money. The traffickers are making this money. Now, the range of prices advertised in Salt Lake City was between $40 and $1,200 an hour. So on the low end, you can exchange a couple 20s for sexual services, but on the higher end, people are spending over $1,000 an hour for sexual services. The internet hasn't just increased the prices, it's increased the availability of commercial sex work to a larger variety of people. Now, those who had before never considered buying sex have the ability to do so from their own home. No longer do you have to go on the street. They can search for anything they want at home, which really increases the amount of people that buy sex. So instead of envisioning like these shady men walking down the street looking for a sex worker, I want you to envision men in suits. Envision your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers. Envision your neighbors. I want you to know that every person, regardless of income, education, or class, has the ability to exploit the girls and women in our neighborhood. I know this is hard to imagine. You always want to see the best in people. And when there's something slightly off, you don't want to think the worst. But until you open your eyes and really see the people for who they are, you will continue to live in this state of denial, and we will not be able to move forward in the fight against trafficking. I'm sure some of you are still thinking, not in my neighborhood, that doesn't happen around me, but I'm going to continue pushing back against that idea until we're all on the same page. No neighborhood hasn't been affected by trafficking. You may think one person can't change the world, but one person can start. You can be the change in the world that we so desperately need. So I am challenging you, all of you, to become that changed. Open your eyes and see the world around you for what it really is. We're a community, we're a family, and most importantly, we're all human. We cannot move forward as a society until all of us care about human rights. And it will take all of us to open our eyes and unite to fight human trafficking. Thank you.